Hello everyone, my name is Krish and here's my AP Research presentation on artificial turf and its effects on non-contact injuries in the National Football League. So first off, I want to begin with running through what I'll be going through in this presentation. So I'll be presenting background information on the topic, my research question, the literature review, my methodology, data analysis, case studies, my gap analysis with key findings, the conclusion, limitations to my research, and what future research should entail on this topic. So first, I want you guys to understand why I chose this topic. Now, this resides personally with me since I'm a big sports fan in general, especially through the NFL. So I'm a fairly recent fan, so I've started to realize that I've been watching consecutive games the last 2 seasons, and I've realized I've seen so many injuries related to turf that it started becoming public discourse, and it is starting to gain popularity on this issue. So I believe that I wanted to see firsthand the tragedies of these injuries, how often it happens, and the connection and real correlation between injuries and artificial turf. So here is some background, or like the comparison of artificial turf in general and natural grass. So artificial turf and natural grass are both used in the NFL. So it's pretty much half-half, where 14 teams use artificial turf and 14 teams use grass, and then 2 teams use actually a mix of both. So on the left there is artificial turf. So artificial turf is usually synthetic, obviously, and they're pretty hard. So as you can see, those pellets, those black pellets over there, they're actually cushion rubbers or crumb rubbers, and they're supposed to protect the players, even though ironically the guy's falling in the picture. So I'll get more into that later. And on the right is grass. And a lot of people, since the NFL started moving to artificial turf because they thought natural grass would be too hard to maintain. So as you can see, they're obviously maintaining it, raking it, and making sure that it's ready for ahead of the Super Bowl. It's also very important to get into the history of when NFL turf or when synthetic. When synthetic turf was introduced. So NFL turf was first introduced in 1966 through the Houston Oilers team. They were the first team to actually implement the synthetic turf. There was no other teams, but throughout the 1970s and throughout the 1990s, turf started becoming more prevalent throughout the NFL, and more teams started incorporating it since the lack of wanting to maintain it. And this actually started sparking debates throughout the 20th and 21st century, since when new teams started implementing the synthetic turf into 2000s, many injuries were correlated with it. Many people would watch their favorite games, watch favorite players get injured on this new synthetic turf. So people had a feeling, they always had an idea that this could possibly be because of synthetic turf. So because of this public discourse, I want to give you some examples on the public rage and what people think about this. So all the way on the left is actually a tweet, or also known as X, of a player actually recognizing or like speaking up about how the NFL doesn't even care about their players. As actually next year in 2026 there's going to be a World Cup in New Jersey in the MetLife Stadium, which uses synthetic turf, but the NFL is actually planning on replacing that turf with grass. So people believe that NFL cares more about soccer players than their own players, since they're not willing to change grass for their own players, but they're willing to change turf for a whole group of other athletes. This is a YouTube video and TikTok about people advocating to use natural grass over turf, and it's been sort of a common theme of everyone and NFL fans commonly knowing that NFL turf is not a good thing. On the bottom is an article on Aaron Rodgers. His is very specific, since Aaron Rodgers' injury was actually the first turf injury during the 2023-2024 season, and it was super iconic because he's a very old player, and all he did was take 3 steps back and he got injured, and he didn't run or jump, and it was just straight off the bat. Now, not only the fans think about this, but it's also the players. So the National Football League Players Association, also known as the NFLPA, represents NFL players and their thoughts on various topics. So the NFLPA Executive Director Lloyd Howell says that 92% of all league players prefer to play on natural grass. So this shows that not only is this an issue between the fans, but it's also an issue between the players, and this is becoming a larger topic. as the years go by. So because of all this discourse of age, I wondered, does artificial turf compared to natural grass increase the frequency and severity of non-contact injuries among NFL players? So I want to go through my literature review first. So these three, one of them is not loading, but these three are my foundational key sources. So the one all the way on the left talks about the National Football League Players Association. One is from a study of turf and toe ankle injuries that goes through specifically through turf injuries. And the one on the right is my third source, which talks about the direct comparison of turf and grass fields in general. So I want to go through each source specifically. So this source specifically speaks on how players feel on artificial turf and what they advocate for. This source helped me understand not just the public's idea, but also how the players felt on this game too. So this source talks about lower body injuries in general. So artificial turf or synthetic turf is actually caused to increase lower body injuries by 25% than natural grass. So this source helped me understand that lower body impacts come from non-contact turf injuries and are much more frequent than natural grass injuries. And finally, this source directly compared turf and grass, their mechanics, and also how often players get injured from each. It's also been shown that from this source that a 2018 study that assessed more than 4,800 NFL foot and leg injuries between regular season games from 2012 to 2016 found that at least 300 fewer foot and leg injuries would have happened if all those games were on grass instead of turf. So this shows that there would have been such a reduce in injuries if these games were instead all played on grass. So there's obviously a big advocacy for grass, and the data shows it. So now I want to go through my methodology. So I first collected data on which teams use grass fields and which teams use turf fields. By using the NFL injury status page, which is not loading here, but it's an injury status page, I counted the number of players who got injured in each team and compared the number of injured players who play for a team that uses grass versus a team that uses synthetic turf. So here's a table that I made. So as you can see, on the left are all the teams that use natural grass, and all the teams on the right are all the teams that use artificial turf. So since it's a very big table, I'm sorry that it's pretty small, but I included the surface type and stadium. So as there's a common theme between all the surface types on artificial turf, they're all made up from field turf, which field turf came out in the 21st century, and that's mainly the main cause of these injuries people think. And I also counted the amount of injuries that were in each team, and it turns out that 20 more players were injured that played for a team with artificial turf. So NFL players who play for teams that use turf actually have a 60.3% chance more of getting injured. Now, this might not be an astonishing number, but it's also important to understand context. It's important to note that this is a broad study, and non-contact turf injuries are much more lasting and dangerous than contact injuries. So it's important to understand that ACL tears and PCL tears can take up to a year or two to even heal. ACL tears last up to 8 to 9 months, and when a player receives this injury, it takes them almost a year and a half to get back to their regular athlete stage. Although players who play for teams with artificial grass are injured 16.3% more than players who play for teams with natural grass, some of these injuries may have also occurred in away games. So these injuries only account for home stadiums, but due to injuries coming from away games as well, this percentage could actually be much higher than 16.3%, and this is just a broader version. So it's also not loading, but I did case analysis on specific players. So on here, there's supposed to be 6 different players that I wanted to show, but I'll go through them. So first is Christian Watson. He's a Green Bay Packers wide receiver. He got injured this season in 2024 and 2025, and he missed a playoff game. So it shows that these injuries are not just for the player's health, but it's also impacting the team and impacting how the fans see their team. So the Packers already had a lot of injuries before going to the playoffs, but since they had such a key player going out, it showed that the fans had no support, or they had no idea that they would even go that far. Another example is Christian McCaffrey, who's a running back for the San Francisco 49ers, if not one of the best running backs in the league in his position. He actually got injured by actually catching a ball in the Buffalo Bills stadium, where he caught the ball and he slipped and fell immediately, and he got a PCL tear right after coming off an ACL tear. So that means so now he's on a second year recovery since he recovered from an ACL tear the year prior. Another example is actually an older player named Dak Prescott. He's a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, and he actually got injured through a strained hamstring. And this shows that a lot of older people, if older people are getting results in these injuries, it can also affect them long term. Another example is actually Stephon Diggs, who's also an older receiver. When it comes to the NFL, 30 and above is considered old, or considered, at that point, they're out of their prime. So he also got injured in this turf stadium, and he also got injured in his turf stadium. And also, I want to expand back on Aaron Rodgers, and he's another old player. So a common theme around these players is that majority of these players are old, and this will lead to my gap that I'll be discussing later on. But it shows that these players are old enough, and they're also experiencing these horrible injuries late into their career. Now, many players receive these injuries early into their career, but knowing that they can receive these so late before they're about to retire shows that there's a big influence on how dangerous non-contact turf injuries really are. So I actually want to dive into a specific case on a 21-year-old rookie this season, Malik Neighbors. During a Thursday night football game, Malik Neighbors played in MetLife Stadium, which is in New Jersey for the New York Giants. Instead of actually getting a lower body injury or straining a muscle, he fell on the turf while catching a ball in a critical moment in the game. And since the turf was so hard, he actually hit his head and ended up getting concussion. So this shows that not only non-contact lower body injuries are affected from turf, but other injuries, even as concussions, can actually lead to chronic trauma and encephalopathy, which affects people in the long term in retirement. So repeated concussions can cause this. So this leads to my gap, which is there's not enough knowledge of turf injuries' long-term impacts on retirement. Now this can be CTE or concussions, but this can also result in long-term in lower body injuries as well. So I want to speak about concussion more. As 1/3 of retired NFL players believe they have chronic CTE, even though a diagnosis of disorder can only be made on autopsy. A survey of 1,980 players found. So that means a lot of players who have had concussions in their past believe that they do have CTE. And what CTE does, it can lead to behavioral problems, and it's resulted from repeated concussions throughout history. So, of course, turf usually happens with lower body injuries. It's also important to understand that concussions is a possible effect of this, as we saw this season. Now, this doesn't happen often, but this shows that there's another light to turf injuries, and that this is a possibility of happening in the future. So these are two examples of two players that actually have suffered from CTE who are retired. So on the left is Rob Gronkowski, and on the right is Antonio Brown. They both have extreme behavioral problems, as Antonio Brown has said many controversial things on social media due to this. Now, not all people who are diagnosed with CTE come from turf injuries, but the fact that turf injuries could potentially also cause concussions makes it even a bigger hazard to have in our football fields and to the players themselves. Besides concussions, I want to pivot back into lower body non-contact injuries. Here's an example of former Dolphins defensive quarterback Byron Jones. After retiring, he realized that he couldn't run or jump due to his injuries sustained playing football. This shows that lower body injuries from turf takes a toll on players from retirement. After all that, here's a conclusion to the research that we discussed. We have deemed that artificial turf is linked to non-contact injuries, and players' opinions and data has aligned, which makes their arguments valid. One, artificial turf being hazardous in general. And the NFL must acknowledge this risk, as they're ready to change MetLife to grass for the World Cup in 2026, but they're not doing it, but they're not willing to do it for their own NFL players. However, there are some limitations to the research that I've done, and I didn't account for weather conditions or footwear, since maybe these cleats were not the best, but then again, it's also important to understand these are NFL players, and they're able to get get the best cleats they can. But I did not specifically go through weather conditions themselves. Another limitation is the lack of access to medical data. So the NFL is actually requires the public to announce all injury statuses updated throughout the day, throughout the week. However, not all the doctors or sports doctors will specifically say what type of injury it is. So they will say it's ACL tear, but they won't go in depth into how severe it is. And due to this, you don't understand how particularly bad these ACL tears could be compared to an ACL tear maybe on natural grass. Another limitation is sample size and time frame. So most of my research came from the 2024 to 2025 season, as well as some of it from the 2023 to 2024 season. So I believe if we expanded this to more seasons, or actually use a higher time frame where I could look into future seasons, then I think this will allow me to expand more on this topic and see if turf is actually causing maybe more concussions or maybe more injuries than grass does in general. For future implications of research, it is important to expand to new sports instead of just football, as sports such as soccer and worldwide sports such as rugby may also use turf. And I also believe that we should research into high school and college football as well, or sports in general, because this doesn't only obviously happen to NFL players. These turf injuries may be happening in our own high school or even in colleges in the D1 level. So I believe that through researching more broad into this subject through different topics instead of just football, we can understand the effects on turf. Thank you for watching.
Okay. What was the most important source of information you found while conducting your research for your background and understanding of the topic, and why was it important to your research process?
So the source that was really important to my research process was actually the source about turf toe and foot and ankle injuries in specific, because I did know that there was injuries going on through turf, but I didn't understand what type of injuries they were, and I realized that a lot of them are a common theme of lower body injuries and occasionally concussions. So the turf toe source explained to me that 25% more players have 25% more chance of getting injured through synthetic turf when it comes to lower body. So I want to expand more on that, and I understood that's a big emphasis on my research.
Thank you.
If you had more time to do additional background research, which lens or perspective would you focus on and why?
So I focus on the majority of the players and the fans, but I feel like I could have focused more on maybe what the management thinks about it, what the commissioner of the NFL thinks about it, what the administration thinks about it, since they're the ones who are putting these rules and who are putting the idea of if whoever's going to put grass is going to be the administration. So they decide on the rules and the laws of the league. So I would try to understand what they think about it, even though their information is not as public as it is.
If you could revisit the research process, what would you do differently? Would you choose a different area of inquiry, and if so, why? If you would choose the same research question, what different methods or approaches would you use?
So if I chose the same research question, I would probably actually dive more into different types of sports, or I would look at football in general instead of just the NFL. So I'd probably look at our high school or even look at college sports as well. Although college sports are not as public as the NFL, I feel like that bringing that light to college football or college sports in general sheds a new light to how people think of turf, as they only think of turf when it comes to the NFL or Major League sports. So I believe that